The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to the Pharisees, "There was a rich man who dressed in purple garments and fine linen and dined sumptuously each day. And lying at his door was a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who would gladly have eaten his fill of scraps that fell from the rich man's table. Dogs even used to come and lick his sores. When the poor man died, he was carried away by angels to the bosom of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. And from the netherworld, where he was in torment, he raised his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his table, and Lazarus at his side. And he cried out, 'Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am suffering torment in these flames.' Abraham replied, 'My child, remember that you received what was good during your lifetime, while Lazarus likewise received what was bad. But now he is comforted here, whereas you are tormented. Moreover, between us and you a great chasm is established to prevent anyone from crossing who might wish to go from our side to yours, or from your side to ours.' He said, 'Then I beg you, Father, send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they too come to this place of torment.' But Abraham replied, 'They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them.' He said, 'Oh no, Father Abraham, but if somebody from the dead goes to them, they will repent.' Then Abraham said, 'If they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone should rise from the dead.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
We have this parable of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man basks in wealth, and Lazarus is outside his door begging. The rich man meets his end and finds himself on the wrong side of eternity, whereas Lazarus is rewarded for his sufferings. The moral of the story is pretty clear. I don't really have to tell you, do I? The lesson here is do not ignore the poor. The measure of your life will be how well you did or didn't care for your fellow human being. And I mean that quite literally. The guy who ignored the poor is in hell in the story. You all know that caring for the poor is something that's required of us. You all know right and wrong. You probably have that idea is cemented in your head from a very young age to be kind to others and to help them when they need it. So you might say, well, Father, it's not like I have anyone outside my door begging that I've been ignoring my whole life, like the rich man in the story. And that might be true, but not everyone who is in need present themselves in the way that Jesus presented Lazarus in the parable. This past week or so, I've been working with a woman. She doesn't live in Cambridge or Rathbone, so you probably don't know her. But she needed some help meeting some material needs. I see her come to the food pantry maybe a couple times a year. She really struggles. There's probably some mental illness at play. She mentions that sometimes. She very much doesn't like human contact, and by that I mean that she is not comfortable around other people. She often just has me drop things off on her doorstep rather than meet her in person. She can't afford a car. She lives in a very small, very rundown house. From the outside, you might even think it's abandoned. It's that shabby. Late last week, she needed help buying some plastic to put over her windows to help her save some money on the heating bills this winter. You know, we have a little cash fund for that sort of thing, to buy people gas to make it to doctor's appointments, little things like that, $20 here, $20 there. And if you want to give some cash for that purpose, you know, mark an envelope and put it in a collection. And it helps if it's cash, not checks, so I know exactly how much we have, you know, at a moment's notice, which is usually how those sort of things happen. But anyway, back to the story. So I went to the Cambridge General Store and bought her the window coverings, and I dropped it off at her house. And like 5 days later, she called me again and left me a message that she wanted to know if she could borrow a staple gun because she didn't have one to hang the plastic around her windows. And so I said, sure. I let her borrow my staple gun. She also asked if she could get a box of food from the food pantry because she doesn't get paid until next month. So I told her, of course. And And we texted back and forth trying to figure out a time where she could get a ride into Cambridge to get to the food pantry to, sign the right forms and pick up her box of food. And it was getting late in the day, and I had meetings and CCD to get to, and so she said, "Sorry about this. Just leave it on the porch, on the step of the food pantry, and I'll find a way into town and get it." And so I did. I left the box of food there with the staple gun and the staples in it, and on the porch of the food pantry. I'm not a fan of doing that, but she doesn't have a card, so what else was I supposed to do? The next day, though, I got another text from her saying that her ride never showed up the previous day and that she didn't make it into Cambridge to get her a box of food. And if you know what the weather was like in Cambridge on Wednesday and Thursday, that box of food sat on the porch of the food pantry all day and overnight and into the next morning in the rain. And this news came to me over text as I was at school teaching my 7th and 8th graders in McCook. And by this time I was getting frustrated and a little bit irritated. It was feeling like, the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. I felt like it was just one request after another. And for about 10 seconds I slipped, and against my better judgment, I complained about it in front of my students. Now, as a priest, there are moments where you know that somebody's taking advantage of your charity, your kindness. You kind of just know when people are asking for food or gas money and their intentions are not good. There are plenty of people who ask priests for help often, multiple times throughout the course of the year, and some of those people never once say the words thank you. This woman is not one of those people. When I told her that her food was likely soaked in rainwater, this is her response. This is the actual text of the message. "Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm trying. Sometimes things don't work out like I planned because I have to be on someone else's time since I'm asking to ride along. I need to save up and get a car, and I'm trying right now to get there." I read that message and I felt so ashamed. So ashamed of ever feeling frustrated, ashamed for ever feeling like I was doing too much for her, ashamed for complaining about her to my students. How dare I? How dare I dismiss her situation, her struggles, her life? She's a child of God. Whether or not she understands that, I don't know. But I'm the pastor for all of Furnace County and part of Red Willow and Gosper and Frontier County, which means that she's my daughter. And this is the sin of the rich man in the parable today. Not that he didn't do anything for Lazarus. The real root of his sin is that he didn't see Lazarus as a person worth loving. There are people suffering right here in our communities. A lot more than you could probably imagine. Suffering from mental health issues, suffering from addiction, people who are out of work or incapable of work, people who are disabled, people who are undereducated, people who come from broken homes that end up outcasts. These people will not come to you begging at your door. But they are there. And for the poor at this moment in history, globally and economically speaking, the future doesn't look so rosy for them right now. The Arapahoe food pantry is overwhelmed. They get people coming from all across the region. Cambridge, not so much, because that's probably, we don't have regular hours. People have to call in ahead of time and schedule an appointment. There's no walk-ins, but the need is there. And so I don't know what the answer is, but we do need to sort of get creative. We need to think of ways to help the less fortunate in our communities. We're starting it's a nationwide initiative called Walking with Moms in Need. It's sort of where we gather all of the information and resources necessary to give to women who are facing a crisis or unplanned pregnancy. Walking with Moms in Need is gathering resources so that we can distribute that information to people that need it. And so I will need help with this in the future. I'm not quite ready for all of it yet, but I will need advice from people in the medical field. I will need help from social workers and therapists. Like I said, I don't have solid details on it because we're just in the beginning stages, but look for something on this soon. Don't make the same mistake that I did and fall into the trap of frustration or being quick to judge others. Even though in the end, it was just 10 seconds that what happened in that text conversation between me and that woman, it wasn't really that big of a deal, but to me it was. Because in the parable that Jesus gives us, it's the subject of the rich man's damnation. It is a point in my life where I made a firm resolution, a firm choice to love that person as I love Jesus myself, to see them as a person to be loved, even in their poverty, even in their mental or physical disability, even in their addictions. And maybe that makes me a fool waiting to be trampled upon, but maybe living like that will save my soul. So I went to the food pantry, picked up the soggy box of food, took it home, replaced the ruined food with stuff from my kitchen, and delivered it to her. And like always, she thanked me. This past Tuesday, the priests of our diocese met in Seward for what is called a priest study day. And we have 3 or 4 of these each year. It's sort of a continuing education type thing. There's a wide range of topics of the day, depending on what the bishop selects. It's anything from boring stuff like administrative procedures and legal procedures to actually relevant topics to the priesthood, like ministering to those who are spiritually or demonically afflicted. And the one that we had this week was led by the professors from the Emmaus Institute. You might see little advertisements for that in the bulletin every once in a while. But the Emmaus Institute it's an institution in Lincoln that is officed within the St. Thomas Aquinas Church, where the Newman Center is at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln campus. And they teach college-level classes on scriptures. Maybe some of you have done it, actually. They have online courses available. But if you are interested in learning and deepening your knowledge of the scriptures, of the Bible, then I encourage you to take these classes. My mother has taken every single one that they've ever offered. And I can tell the difference that it's made in her life these past few years, ever since the Emmaus Institute opened. She now leads Bible studies in her own parish, my home parish in Seward, Nebraska. But anyways, one of the professors who was gave the first talk in the morning on this last Tuesday, this pre-study day, and he sort of made a side comment about a story in the Bible from Genesis chapter 18. And this story, to me, directly pertains to what I've been talking about for the last 13 minutes and 15 seconds, and that is serving our neighbor. So I'll read you the story, and then I'll kind of summarize my thoughts on it, and particularly what this professor said about it. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oak of Mamre, and as he sat in the entrance of his tent while the day was growing hot, looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "Sir, if it please you, do not go past your servant. Let some water be brought that you may bathe your feet, and then rest under the tree. Now that you have come to your servant, let me bring you a little food, that you may refresh yourselves, and afterward you may go on your way." "Very well," they replied, "do as you have said." Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quick, 3 measures of bran flour, knead it and make bread." He ran to the herd, picked out a tender choice calf, and gave it to the servant, who quickly prepared it. Then he got some curds and milk, as well as the calf that had been prepared, and set these before them, waiting on them under the tree while they ate. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he replied. One of them said, "I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah will then have a son." Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent just behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years, so Sarah laughed to herself and said, "Now that I am worn out and my husband is old, am I still to have a child?" But the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really bear a child as old as I am?' Is anything too marvelous for the Lord to do? At the appointed time, about this time next year, I will return to you, and Sarah will have a son." So if the parable that we heard in our gospel tells us exactly what not to do in the case of the rich man, this story tells us exactly what we ought to do in the case of serving others. This is the story where Abraham and Sarah are visited by these three strangers, and they greet them with hospitality and food and a refuge from the day's heat. And in return for their kindness, the three men promise that Sarah will have a child in her old age. And most biblical scholars and commentators have come to the conclusion that these strangers are actually angels, representatives of God himself. We could unpack a lot, but I'll keep it short. First of all, you have the theme of hospitality. Abraham and Sarah pull out all the stops for these three men. They treat them like kings. And to those who are in need, we're not only called to provide for them, to, leave some money in the collection. We're called to love them, to make them feel at home like Abraham and Sarah did, to treat them like they deserve to be treated as children of God, to remind them by our actions that they have value, that they have dignity, and that dignity is sacred. The second theme in the story of Abraham, Sarah, and the three visitors is charity, serving those who are poor. Abraham and Sarah have no idea who these three guys are, and yet their first response is to serve them completely. The people that we serve, they shouldn't have to pass some sort of test in order for us to serve them. The poor we suffer, they likely have addictions, they likely have mental illnesses, reasons why they are in the place they are. They might be the very cause of all their problems. And that might be frustrating to us, but we shouldn't stop serving them because of it. They shouldn't have to check some boxes in order for us to love them, because love isn't based off of performance. A person doesn't earn love, they are given love. And most people need to be loved first before they can figure things out and change their lives for the better. Another theme from this story of Abraham and Sarah and the three strangers tells us that when we serve others, we should do so expecting nothing in return. The three men tell Abraham and Sarah that they're going to have a baby in a year's time, but Sarah doesn't believe it. She laughs at the idea. Are you serious? In my old age? That's a good one. Tell me another. They expect nothing in return. For Abraham and Sarah, the promises that God made to them would not be met in their lifetime at all. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation, and that promise was only completely realized in Jesus Christ thousands of years later, who would form the church, a great nation based on the faith of Abraham. So when we serve someone, there should be nothing expected in return. It's not like when someone asks for help, I say, well, let's see you come to church for a few weeks in a row, and then I'll get back to you. Or it's not like when someone asks for help, I think, well, they haven't put anything in the collection basket right recently. I don't think, I don't know. In fact, we shouldn't expect anything in return. I do not expect my staple gun to ever come back to me, right? We shouldn't even expect to be thanked in return, which takes some humility on our part. When we give that freely, when we love that freely, when we're truly giving, when we're truly loving, we are loving in the way that Jesus loves us. Now, the last observation that I want to make about the story of Abraham, Sarah, and the three strangers has to do with something that I've been thinking about over the last few days, ever since Tuesday. And it's the whole reason I bring this story up. And this was the professor's actual comment on this story. He brought up this intriguing point that there is something strange, there's something fishy about these three strangers. And he thinks that they were not angels at all. I don't know Hebrew, so I had to take him on his word. But he said, when you read this story in the original Hebrew, it does indeed say that there were three men, but Abraham only ever addresses them as one person, which is strange. It sort of comes through in the English. For example, it says that Abraham ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and then bowing to the ground, he said, "Sir, if it please you, do not go on past." He's greeting them, but he addresses them as sir. And interestingly enough, one of them speaks out and tells Sarah that when he returns this time next year, she will conceive a son. So there's this confusion within the story, if you read it in Hebrew, that were there three guys, or was there only one guy? If there were three guys, why is Abraham addressing all of them as sir? If there is one guy, why does it say that there's three? And the professor that was giving this talk on Tuesday, he said this: what if Abraham was in fact speaking to God himself, who is three persons in one nature? And the person who says that he'll return to Sarah in 1 year's time is the Holy Spirit, by which she conceives Isaac, her son. Every time you provide hospitality, every time you serve the poor, act as Abraham and Sarah. Assume that you are providing hospitality for God himself. Assume that you are serving the most holy Trinity when you serve the poor, because, as the scriptures tell us, you are.